All right, kicking it off. Well, thanks everyone for coming. If you don't mind just using the chat to put your name, pronouns, and where you're coming from, extra points if you include the territory, the native lands in which you're residing. Just gonna start us off here. Oh, I go to the next. There we go. With some introductions. I'm gonna do the first half and then Tracy's gonna frame the session for us. Wanted to start it off with a quick land acknowledgement, just to express gratitude and acknowledgement toward the lands, native lands in which we reside. This is a virtual conference and we're coming from all across Turtle Island, so I can't speak to where you're from, but I encourage you, if you're not sure on whose territory you reside, this is a great resource up on this slide to look that up. I'm in the Haudenosaunee region, which is now New York, Ithaca, New York. I just wanted to take a quick moment to bring some mindfulness and intent to this space and recognize that as non-Indigenous folks on stolen land, that we're responsible to recognize that colonialism and colonization is an ongoing process, and that Indigenous people face violence and loss of rights as they struggle for water, food, land, and sovereignty, while also holding space where there are many incredible contributions of Indigenous people today and historically that are also disproportionately underfunded and undersupported. So encouraging taking the space to value contributions of Native-led initiatives in your area to build authentic relationships with Indigenous leaders in your area and challenge ourselves to continue to push for accountability and allyship. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Tracy.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to go to our session. I know that there are a couple of other things happening right now, and it's a really great conference with a lot of really rich content. So speaking for myself, I feel really honored that you chose our session to go to. So if you read the program or the description, you'll note that in the description we said that we are gearing this for a white anti-racist audience, but we welcome everyone. I don't know the racial identity of everyone who's joined this session, but I want to just lift up why we specifically named that this was directed for a white audience. There's a lot of work to be done in building an anti-racist practice, and it's really important, and many of you I'm sure already know this, but it's really important that those of us who identify as white take on the labor of educating ourselves and each other about racism, about the harms of racism, and about how to sharpen and deepen our anti-racist practice and not put that burden on people of color. And moreover, within that practice of becoming or deepening your white anti-racist practice, you want to make sure that you're supporting other white folks, but also that practice can cause and create a lot of harm for any BIPOC people who are forced to witness it. And if you do identify as BIPOC and you're in this session, welcome. You know, we're glad to have you with us. If there's any learnings that you want to share, if you want to learn and be a part of this practice, it's meant to be a welcoming and inclusive space. I think there's a couple of things that I just want to make sure people keep in mind as you participate in this session. What we're trying to do is open a conversation, learn from each other, and make sure that we all are supporting each other in being better anti-racists and in dismantling white supremacy and racism whenever we encounter it, in this session specifically in our organizations. We're not trying to prove that we are the most anti-racist person in the room. That's not what this is about. It's not meant to shame other people, because no white person was born knowing how to be anti-racist. We're born into this invisible white culture. We take it for granted as young people. And I would say, I have never met a white person who just knew how to do this work. It takes time and practice and learning. And so we want to create also a practice of white people supporting each other. We're also, none of us are, the three of us presenters are not experts. We're not here to define terminology or lecture or present. We're really here to share our own experiences leading organizations that have been actively and intentionally seeking to dismantle white supremacy, and to learn what you all have learned in that work in turn. So it's really meant to be a peer listening space. And there's no one way to define so many of the terms that we use in this work. That kind of definition in and of itself is a part of white supremacy culture. We want to embrace people's, like learnings and approaches and recognize that there are different ways of going about this work. There's definitely wrong ways, but there's no right way. There's no one right way. And this is super challenging work. It's an important growth experience for everyone. I really hesitate to ever use the word difficult or hard, because having the experience of racism, being a person in the society who has to experience racism, that's the really hard, difficult stuff. What white people are doing is a challenge. It's a growth edge, but and it's important to name that. And it's going to be work that we are going to grow from for the rest of our lives. The work is never done. It's life's work. And the last thing I just want to say is that we're all showing up to this work at different levels. And, I've kind of said this already, but let's just make sure that, let's recognize how important it is that we're showing up for this work and how important it is to continue to show up and have this conversation. Natalie, I'm about to turn it over to you, but I just wanted to say that the reason why the three of us wanted to do this session is because we've all interacted with each other at different conferences. I know I have been super impressed and in admiration of both DC Greens and Groundswell separately for their work in trying to center equity and learn from the leadership of frontline, to follow the leadership of frontline communities. And so I reached out to Lauren and Nat a couple of years ago about doing a session at another conference, and it went really well and was well received and people appreciated the information. So we decided to take it to this conference as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nat, to talk about Groundswell's journey.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. We already looked at that slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about organizational development to sort of set the stage, and then we'll hear from Lauren and Tracy too. We're not, as Tracy said, getting super into all of the details here, but we can share some of the resources that we've used and loved through the Whova app after the session. So please check back for those. There's a lot of resources out there. Your organization might not have a lot of resources, or your farm. So one of the things that we've done as Groundswell, Groundswell Center for Local Food and Farming, we train beginning farmers in the Finger Lakes region of New York. We are 5 staff, actually 4 right now, because we're hiring a director. That's why I'm filling in as the interim. We have about $300K budget per year. And we've only been our own 501c3 nonprofit for about 2 years. So we don't really have a lot of capacity to invest in a lot of outside facilitation and these huge equity audits. And some of what the leading organizations doing this work are doing is like to have the money, time, and resources. But there's so much with the process that you can just do within your team and within your committees and your board. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Groundswell's mini and equity audit and a way of somewhat of a framework, but a way or a tool that folks can take pieces of their organization and start small. This example is more around hiring and organizational culture. So speaking to the workplace, And just as an example of a process that we went through is looking at your programs, your internal culture, whatever it is that you want to analyze through a racial equity lens, and really breaking out what aspects are rooted in white culture and white supremacy culture. In which ways are you maybe moving toward multiculturalism, but only have a few people of color in very specific roles? For example, we've done this is our only staff of color is the equity is in their title, or diversity is in their title. So that's the token organization. And then moving toward a space where you have a lot of folks from different backgrounds and experiences contributing in leadership, celebrating and making space and policies and practices for honor different folks' backgrounds. And then eventually to anti-racist. So supporting, uplifting people of color in a really deep and transformative way. And this is something where for Groundswell, at least as a small nonprofit that was committed to racial equity for a long time, we've really hit, I think, several of these along this trajectory. It's not really, for us at least, I'm using a line here, but it's not really a line. It's more of a cyclical process of learning, like as the organization learns and the breadth of knowledge, of awareness, transparency, and accountability grows. It's amazing how you learn one thing you thought you were doing really well in as far as racial equity can turn into something that you were wrong, and having to constantly go through that process. And I think for us, especially, and for a lot of organizations, especially pre-George Floyd and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, diversity was really the talk, right? It was like, let's bring people of color into our organization, let's be representative. But the problem with that, and Groundswell faces as well, is hiring in people of color to our organization or welcoming partners of color into our organization without actually doing the work to understand racial equity, to make a space, to hold space for our privilege, to do our own education as a legacy white-led organization, led to a lot of turnover and lacking in retaining some really, really great talent. And so looking at moving beyond that, the tokenism, moving beyond the inclusion statements, and really operationalizing a workplace that can be inclusive and celebratory. And that's really hard within the nonprofit structure, or with just basically within capitalism at all, where we're battling for the top. But how am I doing on time? Okay, great. And I heard someone unmute, if you can unmute, thanks. All right. Yeah, and so some of the ways in which we sort of shifted over from the dominant white culture into diverse cultures and norms. I'm not going to go in like too much detail because I don't want to, I'll let Tracy and Lauren also share this, was just like looking at our organizational branding and transparency. I think sometimes white-led organizations like Groundswell, we get so excited that we're making progress in racial equity, and we scream it from the rooftops. And unfortunately, a lot of the funders are much more comfortable funding white-led organizations that are doing racial equity work than they are with funding Black-led organizations. And so recognizing that even in the space of doing racial equity work, that our organization's reputation allows us to leverage resources and access programs, access people that the people of color in our direct community that have been doing this work for 20 years haven't had the same recognition. So, looking to accountability and transparency around where you're at and being in right relation with, I'm just speaking to what we did, is being in right relation, looking back at those relationships that have maybe never been strong or have maybe been damaged, and taking some inventory as far as what happened there. And for Groundswell as a very place-based organization, we have really strong ties in the community, but then there are also pockets of the community in which we don't have strong relationship with. And so, you know, we're doing our job as a tiny white-led organization to build relationships, but there's so much complexity there as far as all the needs of different clients that we serve. So, you know, we work a lot with Black farmers. We work a lot with refugee, immigrant and refugee farmers. And we work a lot with college students. We have Cornell. And so just recognizing the various needs of all of those different groups that may fall under person of color, but have so many different needs, and the, you know, that conflict that can come up, or that learning that can come up when you're working in such a multicultural group that sort of like feels like the work, but can be really exhausting. Yeah, so just, I think that's all I have to add on this. Might be a little bit under time, but and I'm gonna do, and we can share the slide. I think I'm actually gonna turn off my share so Lauren and Tracy can share and you can see their face. I don't know if you can see my face, but I personally find it better when you could see the person. And I don't remember who's next, if it's Tracy or Lauren, but I'm gonna pass it. And thank you.
You actually are just ahead of time, so.
Oh, good.
That's fine. I'm sure we can use the extra time.
So I think I'm up next on this this piece of things. So I'm Lauren Schwader-Beal. I'm executive director and co-founder of DC Greens, which is an organization working to advance health equity in the District of Columbia by building a just and resilient food system. And I'm really glad, Natalie, that you mentioned the issue of kind of being a lightning rod for resources as a white-led organization. That, and you know, I think part of what I'm going to do and Tracy are going to do is give some more concrete examples of places where we are, where we feel like there's been some success in our organization, and places where we've also continued to struggle and sort of our learning edges. I think for DC Greens, you know, we recognized a number of years ago that we were able to pull down more resources than some of the BIPOC-led groups that were operating in our area. And one of the things that we've really tried to do is actually build a resource transfer strategy into our development plans. So part of our goals in our development plans, and I should say we are a larger organization. We have about a $5 million budget, you know, 16 plus staff members, multicultural staff. And we've started to actually build out strategies for resource transfer. And I don't mean getting money and handing it off. I don't mean what we've recognized is, you know, when you pull down resources and then redistribute them, you're sort of maintaining the power as a gatekeeper. But what we've started to do is recognize that we can actually deploy our institutional power and privilege that comes from being a white-led organization to make introductions to funders, to validate organizations that might not be on the radar of some of the folks that are in our funding networks. And, you know, we were sort of doing this informally for a while. And then what we realized is, no, we really need to formalize this as a set of practices, have some strategic goals for our development department that are around resource transfer, and start tracking this actually very formally. So there's ways that you can operationalize your values, you know, into your actual organizational plans that make it, you know, not an add-on to do this work, but actually a part of your core business model. Another thing that I'll mention is a number of years ago, and, you know, I would say 2015, 2016, we were definitely in the tokenism part of the chart. And, you know, we had a couple of staff members of color who had joined our team, and they really started sort of sounding an alarm from internal, you know, that we weren't having explicit conversations about racial equity. We weren't acknowledging the way that white supremacy culture was sort of alive inside of our organization. And it really caused us to pause and take the time to start having much more real conversations with each other, which has developed over time into both a set of, we have a white caucus and a POC caucus that meet regularly in our organization. We have sort of goals around ensuring that we are identifying and uprooting white supremacy cultural practices inside of the organization. And these are all very explicit inside of the strategic plan and inside of all of our work plans. Another thing that we did was maybe 3 years ago, we realized that a lot of our staff of color were, not exclusively, but many of the folks that were doing the sort of frontline work with community were staff of color, and that those staff were not being compensated as much as some of the, the staff that's doing development or the staff that's doing communications. And so what we did was we worked with a really brilliant BIPOC consultant who had developed something called a pay equity scale, where as an organization, we started to really think about what our values were as an organization and what we actually wanted to put financial value on. So for example, how much emotional labor is a part of your job? Do you have to use a second language as a part of your job? Is there physical risk as a part of your job? And every job description is ranked, and those aren't the only factors. There's also, how much liability do you have for the organization? Leadership. There's various metrics, but every individual is sort of ranked along a scale of 1 to 5, and then there's actual dollar value placed on each of the point system. And what we found was this had a dramatic impact on particularly what we were compensating the staff that were doing sort of hands-on direct service program work, because the emotional labor was really never being compensated prior to that. So that was a major shift in our organization. I'm going to take this one last minute to just name, I think I'm still on time because I got Natalie's extra time. Sorry, Tracy. I stole the extra time. So another thing that I think was a learning for me, and something I mentioned in our pre-meeting, I sort of thought I'm sort of an informal person, and I had this sort of naive thought when I was, starting this organization. Oh, my door's always open. Come and talk to me whenever. And to me, that was an expression of equity, right? Oh, anybody can come in at any time. But it turned out that the only folks that were actually coming in to speak with me were white staff who felt comfortable opening up the door to the white director and having an informal conversation. And it was sort of, I didn't realize that my own informality was actually not equitable, because I wasn't aware of the ways that sort of my own white cultural practices were sort of expected. The only people who were taking advantage of it were people who felt comfortable in that space. And that was a real learning for me about making sure, and it's a tiny learning, but I think it's an example where there's so many places where making sure that we're identifying how we're sort of the insidious ways that we're, reproducing white supremacy culture and uprooting them and making changes. So I'll stop there. I mean, there's a million examples when you get into this work, and I'm sure many more will come up as we continue to talk together. I'll hand over to Tracy.
Thank you. So I didn't mention this when I initially spoke in the session, but I'm Tracy Lerman. I'm the executive director for a couple more months of the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group. We represent, we work in 12 Northeastern and Mid-Atlantic states, and we convene farm and food systems practitioners together for collaboration, co-learning, and policy advocacy. And actually, we have a conference next week, and I hope you all can make it. I've linked it on the Whova platform. So my organization is very similarly sized to Nat's. Our budget, depending on the year, is between 300 and 400K. We have 4 people on staff, but various levels of full and part-time. And we have been on a pretty significant transformation towards embodying equity and centering the leadership of frontline and BIPOC communities and the solutions proposed by those communities for intractable food systems challenges. So in terms of in terms of accomplishments, it definitely feels awkward to be a white person trumpeting your accomplishments around racial equity, but I do think it's important to also name shifts that have happened. So for us, when I came on staff here, I would say the vibe around equity was more that, NISOG was known as a regional and local farm and food systems organization. And I recently told someone the other day that I actually don't really care about local food systems, because local food systems was, at least how I understood it to be, a strategy to achieve, equity for farmers, environmental sustainability, viable, food-based economies. And then at some point it felt like local became the goal and we lost sight of the actual goals we were trying to achieve. So I think so far as localism and regionalism support an equitable and just sustainable food system, I'm interested in it. And beyond that, I don't have that much interest in those concepts. What I am really interested in, and what I've tried really hard to bring to NISOG, is a justice-based food system where we value all of the labor that goes into growing and producing and transporting our food. And we recognize that there is no one culture or way of being in the food system that should be given primacy just because that's always the way that it's been. And I think this has played out in that the biggest and most visible program that we have is our conference. And we have made significant shifts to the conference to make it more accessible, to make the program more diverse, and to make it really a space where, wherever you're working in the food system, you have an opportunity to not just attend and sit in and, listen to a session, but actually showcase your work. And, if you're a BIPOC person, it's not like all you are expected to do is talk about your trauma or talk about, educate everyone else about racism, but talk about the work that you're leading in your community that brings you joy, that is, of course, related to food systems. So our conference has gotten significantly more diverse. The participants and attendees have gotten more diverse, and the feedback that we've gotten from attendees, BIPOC attendees in particular, is that, finally they're at a conference where they're not one of 3 other BIPOC people in the room. It's 4:30, so I'm going to just immediately shift to my learning edge. It's kind of hard to choose which of my many learning edges I want to choose from, because literally I feel like I stumble in this work every day. But I think what I'd like to talk about is staff supervision. And this is something that I really, really struggle with. I am, in general, I don't love giving critical feedback to people. It's just a challenge that I have as a boss. And I have not figured out how to give my BIPOC staff constructive feedback without feeling like I'm also replicating the, the harm of racism. I totally know that feedback is a critical part of staff development. And if it's like the kind of feedback that's like, you did great, but you could do better. But if I really have to discipline or call out a staff person for just performance issues, that's something that I'm still struggling with, because I think what it comes down to is that hierarchical workplaces, another example of white supremacy culture, and it's hard to kind of say, okay, yes, that's something that we need to ultimately dismantle, but I still am the supervisor and I still need to give this feedback. And so it's something I'm still working on. So I'm going to bounce it back to you, Lauren, to move us into the next part of the presentation.
Great. Well, we didn't warn you about this, but we are now going to really expect you all to participate in this. So the next section of this, we're planning to do a pair share. So Natalie is going to, in fact, as I speak, I think she's creating pairs of breakout rooms, and we're going to ask, in a breakout room, if folks, could come off of I call it visual mute, and my kids make fun of me, but I don't, if you could come onto the screen when at least when you're in your pair share, I'm sure that would be appreciated by your partner, though obviously we all are juggling many things, and if it's not possible, certainly understand. So for this next 5 minutes, we'd like you to really just open up, where's your organization at? Particularly thinking about the spectrum that Natalie shared with us. What are the things that you'd sort of say about your organization? And we're going to be just taking about 2.5 minutes each in this time. It actually maybe even less now since we're running a couple minutes over, but we'll give you a warning. And Natalie, why don't you kick us into—
See you back in the big room. Session twice. Okay. Okay, I'm trying. Okay, there's 3. I'm just trying to make sure every room has 2. One person, it looks like Tracy's in her own room. Move to. Okay. Lisa, you're not in her room.
I came back to the main room because no one was in my room.
No one was in your room? Oh, I'm sorry.
I waited for a bit too. I mean, maybe I was impatient and I was
Let me
like,
see. No, it's good. Which room were you in? Let's see. Well, you can
have
be
no
in my
idea.
room. Someone was in here twice too, so it might have been that.
Oh, okay, sure.
No,
I
they're
think
in
it
there.
was five or six, but I
Yeah,
can't.
okay. There's Alice too, who was in a room by themselves. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, it's okay.
We can chat if you'd like.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to.
Anyone else in the main room? We've got a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what exactly are we sharing out about?
Oh, sorry. So we're sharing out about where your organization or business, or if you're not representing an agency, where you personally are at on your journey to racial equity, thinking of it as a sort of iterative scale, starting in white supremacy culture and moving toward anti-racism.
Yeah. Good question. So I just started with my organization a month and a half ago, and I think as a whole, the Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development, which is the organization I'm working with, we have a lot of different projects that are going on at a historic poor farm, which it also houses where my main work is going on, which is the Grow Johnson County farm. It's a 5-acre organic farm that distributes food to partner organizations in our community to combat food insecurity. So we're donating food to food banks, shelters like HACAP, daycare centers, free of charge. Like, it's all charity work, basically. And So I just took over the position that a gal, Michi Lopez, had. And her role was more of an access and equity coordinator. And my role is more education and outreach. And we're actually working on developing like farm to school curriculum that centers BIPOC students. And let me tell you, our organization is a white dominated organization. Executive director is a white male. Our program director is a white woman who is very much, they're both very much involved in the work of like dismantling white supremacy and systemic oppression in a lot of ways, but within our organization. And then so it's kind of complicated in that this historic poor farm where the Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development kind of oversees all of the projects that are going on at the farm. And then that's overseen by the Johnson County Supervisors, which is a board of like white people.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, we're, I think, committed to bringing more diverse voices to our organizations, and that we have what we call the Global Food Project, which invites immigrants and refugees to come to the historic poor farm and either have a garden plot or, you know, like share equipment and kind of learn about, have access to land to grow their food on. And so, you know, there's like a lot of things that
you should discuss this in your breakout room. I have to bring us back already. It's only like a 2-minute, but
okay.
Very interesting. I have a lot of responses, but I want to keep us on track because we'll get into this kind of thing in the breakout room. So hopefully I'm in yours.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, they have 60 seconds. Yeah, I mean, Groundswell has a similar sort of thing. I mean, we're a pretty multicultural organization, but like running BIPOC specific training programs, but also knowing that we're not a BIPOC led organization in a lot of ways. And so like, how are we, holding that? And
it's a tough one. I mean, we're really trying to work with a lot of community partners that are BIPOC led community organizations, and like really trying to center their needs and their voice, and you know, like how can we collaborate and fulfill a need and not come in and kind of take over and just, you know, do what we want to do. Basically. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think I have a lot to learn in this session, so appreciate it.
Glad you're here. Welcome back. People are coming back in. Hi. Oh, it's nice to see everybody's faces.
Hello.
Great. Welcome back. I know that our conversation was very interesting, not long enough. So the good news is we're all going to have a chance to have a longer, that was an amuse-bouche. I was supposed to say that before. That was just a little nibble of the conversation so that we can get everybody, you know, with their cameras on and talking to each other and part of the work together. And why don't we just quickly share a little bit, like popcorn share in the chat, you know, some of the things that you talked about in your conversation. You know, I think that, or people can, if there's anybody who wants to kind of popcorn out a couple thoughts or something that resonated with them that they heard from someone else. We're just going to take a couple minutes to debrief that. So I'll say I heard a lot of folks in my group, which I ended up listening into a pair share, people really in the work. It was interesting to hear so many things that resonated with me about, you know, the difficulties of just investing time, investing resources, and trying to get somewhere, but still kind of feeling like there's so much more to do. And you know, that was something I definitely heard in my group. We have someone over here saying that they learned a new term, ethical imperative, as a term to describe the differences across people when deciding to pursue racial equity or justice work. We heard about a podcast, Seen on Radio. Good resource for folks. Anybody else want to share something that popped to them in their conversation?
Well, I like the chart that was shown, the organizational development chart. That's what we discussed, kind of assessing where our organization is. And I think I'll be bringing that back to our staff meeting on Tuesday. So thank you. We're towards the left. Yeah, more, yeah, between white culture and token. Yeah, unfortunately.
That's the best time to start using that chart. Get the conversations going and have people see what's actually happening. I'm realizing that we actually ran a little bit over, so I'm gonna claw back that time so that we have an opportunity to really have deep conversation together in groups. So Tracy, do you want to explain how we're going to do our bigger breakout, and folks get ready to dive in deeper?
So this next breakout will be based on one of three identities that you can select from, depending on what kind of organization you work for. Nat's going to be setting up breakout groups again, but you'll be able to choose which one to join. It'll be farmers or farms, small, kind of scrappier organizations, and larger institutions. It might not be a perfect fit, but wherever you think, if you work for a small business, maybe go to the farm one. But just to sort of, we've found in previous times when we've done this, that those kinds of groupings made the most sense because the issues that came up were more similar in each one of those groupings. And then when we jump into those groups, we'll take a couple minutes to write down our journal. What are the burning questions, growing edges you have in bringing this work to your organization? So Emily, you said that your organization is more on the left side of that spectrum. I imagine probably most white-led orgs are, and probably of the white-led orgs that think they're more to the right, we're actually more to the left than we think we are. So, but you'll write down a couple of different things that you'd really like to workshop and explore with the group. And then start listing those out in the chat for your group. And then the facilitators, which are me, Nat, and Lauren, will look at those questions that are coming up in the chat and sort of assess where the heat in the room is and what we think would be best spent discussing. And then we'll workshop the burning questions, and folks who are in that discussion who have thought about this or have worked on it in their organization can offer some experiences, or, it just become, a peer discussion, sharing about how to address some of those issues. And in the meanwhile, one of you in that group is going to volunteer to take notes and report back, as is typically done when you do breakout sessions in workshops or whatever. You identify the person that takes the notes and reports back at the end. So I think that's it. It can be further explained in the groups, and we'll be in these groups for about 25 minutes. And that's it. I think you can go ahead and break everyone out. And remember, you'll be choosing the group. You won't automatically be sent to one. You'll be able to choose based on what kind of an organization or business you're from.
Okay, it's open. I think.
How does this work? We pick one.
You pick one. Can you see it?
I can see breakout rooms in progress, but I can't see a way to pick.
Okay, maybe I'm gonna assign you.
Are we gonna just call it out?
Other people are able to pick, I think.
You have to scroll down. So I'm
Oh.
going to go to small,
Oh, I
scrappy
see.
organizations.
Oh, I see.
I
Okay.
see. That's helpful. Okay.
If anyone
Okay,
else
got
needs help getting into a room, let me know.
There's only one person in the farmer room.
Hold on. So I go to, how do I get into it though?
Is this a join in the top right corner of the institutions?
No, I just see, I
Let's
think
see.
I have too much power or something. You know what I mean? Like I'm not,
I tried to put you into one.
yes, I'm going now. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Can you put me, this is Karen Stark, can you put me in the small scrappy organizations? Because I can't figure out how to get in either.
I got you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else need help? I'm supposed to be in farmers, but there's only one in there. Emily, where are you going?
I think I'm gonna go to institutions.
All right, you want me to
But
put
I
you in
also,
there?
yeah, please. Thanks.
Alice, I have two of you. I think you just went into one. Okay. Doris, I don't think, do you know if there was anyone who was using translation that needs to be in a group? I can't hear you also. Okay, Jules. Corbin, do you need help getting into a room? Or Bobby Joe? Okay, I'm gonna join a room too. I'll see you later, Dory. Looks like people are coming back into the room. All right, I think we've got everybody back. Sorry, I'm trying to do the tech. It's a lot.
Done great. And I realized that we actually didn't designate who was going to lead this section. But I vote for one of you.
I vote for you, Nat. You haven't talked in a while.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I wasn't actually in a session. I would be happy to facilitate this session. So we have a few more minutes here. We want to get into the closing at 5:25. So we were just hoping if some either note takers to start, or if not, volunteers would discuss maybe some either A, some learnings that you've taken away from your breakout sessions, or B, anything that you take back to your organization, agency, or life. And if you want to, that'd be great.
And I also just wanted to say that because we only had 2 breakout groups, is that right?
That's correct.
And we have 15, we also forgot to designate a note taker. I took notes in the chat that we can, rather than having it be a formal report back, it could be more of a, you know, I think folks can share as they feel called to.
Yeah, more of a popcorn, if you have something to say that you think another group that wasn't in your group would benefit from, sure. Anyone?
Well, I'll just start.
Great.
I don't like silence. I appreciated some of the group members do have a white caucus and then a BIPOC caucus with their organization, and one of them uses a book called White Supremacy and Me. So I think that's a good thing. I'm going to suggest that in my work. So
Thank you, Emily.
Peg, you got cut off in the middle of sharing, and I thought it was a really important point that you were making about just sort of little acts of courageousness. And I'm wondering if you would mind sharing it with the group.
Thank you, Tracy. That's very flattering. I was saying that I was at a conference that this was in person a few years ago. We were sitting around in a circle, a group of Black women and white women, and one of the Black women explained of a recent time where she was at a meeting at work and mostly white people in the circle, and she something was said that was really offensive to her as a Black woman, or general racist comment, and she said nobody said anything, and she was pretty sure that the white people in the group probably didn't think that it was a good thing, but nobody said anything. And she said all it would have taken would have been somebody to say, wait a second, that what you just said doesn't feel right, and just kind of stopping that cycle, which has helped me sometimes when I've been able to just say something like that instead of coming up with this great answer, to comment, just to stop the cycle. And, that can be a real value to the person of color who's sitting there.
That is such a great point. I think that was we were in the same group, and that was the last thing we were talking about when we were abruptly brought back to the main group. And I know that I feel like I've experienced a situation like this once, and also trying to understand people's perspective. I mean, I grew up in Haiti in a culture where people just say what they mean, and they don't care about hurting your feeling. And having lived in the Midwest for a few years now, I do realize that there are people who are very anti-confrontational, and it's a struggle for them to vocalize discomfort or disagreements. And there are bystander training. I don't know at an organizational level who conduct them, but I know that there are such training. In my school, we do have a department of, it's not diversity, I don't remember the name of the department, it's a different department, but they do host those kind of talk and workshop. And I think that being prepared is better than being caught off guard. So knowing that in the world that we're living, it's a matter of if, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you might be in a situation like this, and then later you're gonna beat yourself up and say, I wish I had said this, I wish I had said that, and you might be uncomfortable the whole week because you didn't say anything. So if you could attend those trainings, read a book, or find resources so that you're ready whenever you put in a situation like this the next time to intervene in a way that feels comfortable because you have done the homework and you're ready now to step in.
Thank you, Maritza.
I
And
think
Peg.
to continue on to what you just said, Maritza, I think this issue of feeling comfortable, like being confrontational, is a big problem. And one thing that's been helpful for me is approaching it in the sense of like coming in with love and a desire to grow and say, I love this organization, I love our values, I love our work, and I don't think we're doing it justice with this conversation, and kind of calling people in as like, I care about you and I care about our relationship and our relationship as a community. And for that reason, it's too important to like let go of. And if you are able to say that this is coming from a place of love with, accountability, there is less like, you know, this calling in and this accounting for what you're saying isn't about breaking relationship. It's about building relationship. And I think it's easier to say, I'm also doing this for this person because I would be uncomfortable if it was about me, but I'm also doing it for the person who just said this because I want us to be able to keep working together in a healthy and safe environment. And I found it a lot easier to call people in saying, hey, we talked about decolonizing, we talk about anti-sexist, we talk about anti-racism, and yet it's only white men talking. Can we come back to our values and do better? But it's this balance of being gentle and being a little like, okay, this can't go on anymore. Is it a little difficult to, you know, navigate sometimes?
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, calling people in, not calling them out. Thanks, Lauren. Francesca, I didn't know you were putting in the chat. I didn't know if you wanted to speak up, but Francesca is appreciating your framing, Barbara, and yeah, feeling like thinking this, but not actually articulating it. Thanks for nailing it on the head there. And what else do we have in the chat? So from Francesca, this is about Lauren described some of what she was hearing in the group as a spiral. I found it really helpful to start mapping the different stages of where people and their organizations were at onto a spiral. And there's a link in there. Does anyone have anything else to add? Oh, wow, I like this spiral. Francesca, did you just make this spiral right now?
Yeah, I was handwriting it in my notebook and then did a weird Google doodle in the notes I was taking on my computer.
Well, thank you. That's great.
I love that. Yeah. No, that it came up in our conversation because, you know, everyone is in the work. Everyone who was talking was like, it's all these sort of different stages of development, and especially in an organization that has big institutional power structures, a lot of what came up for us is like, you know, how do you shift the different components that have to be shifted to get to the end goal? And, you know, I think I like spirals because it's sort of like you're building on yourself. You're not leaving something in the past. It's not like, oh, I was here and now I'm here. It's like, okay, all right. And we keep working and we keep moving. And sometimes we don't feel like we're going anywhere, but you know, it's moving. So that is a beautiful sketch. Thank you.
And does anyone from either group have anything that feels particular to either a scrappy organization or a larger institution that maybe the other one hasn't experienced or thought about?
Well, I know in our group, what came up a lot was capacity to, you know, there's so much work to be done and there's never enough resources to do it all. So how do we make sure that we address all of these things that are screaming for our attention all at once, including equity work and the, you know, the work of the day? Or how do we balance all of these, you know, critical mission-driven needs in our work with limited capacity and resources? That was something that came up for a couple of folks in our breakout group as well. And I'm wondering if anyone wants to share any learnings that they've had from that. I know at NESOG, I can say that we just stopped doing the thing that wasn't racial equity or stopped doing the things that was causing more harm and really focused on racial equity and made a decision to center equity. And I think that for us, it was perhaps easier because our focus has always been so broad and our organization has always been so small. We cover the entire food system from production to consumption and access. We're never going to be able to cover all issues with the same amount of intensity. And so we just decided that we were going to make equity the priority. And I know that we lost people. We used to really hold a critical food hub, a conversation around food hub and values-based supply chains. And there were a lot of the thought leaders around that who were coming to the conference. And I think when they couldn't get that content as much at our conference and through our programs, they stepped away. But then the surprising thing is that, not surprising, is that folks who are doing food hub work and, you know, values-based supply chain work recognize that it's critical to integrate equity into that work. And so they came to the NESOG programming to figure out how they could weave equity throughout that kind of work. So yeah, I think that was an important learning for us, a positive learning.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes. I think we have time for one more. Laurel, did you want to share? I saw you unmuted.
Sure, I just wanted to say along the lines of what Tracy was saying, that our organization has just begun to run an equity screen on everything we're doing as a way of prioritizing JEDI or justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work in everything we're doing. That at least when we're about to make a social media post, we're about to start a new program, we're about to apply for a grant, whatever, we quickly sometimes and usually try to have more time run an equity screen. How does this impact communities of color in our area? Also, we say, how does this impact people with disabilities and so on? So it's one way we've found, and it's similar to what Tracy was saying, I think.
I think it would be great. Someone asked about the resource share, and I know we're really interested in making sure that we're all sharing out the resources that our organizations are using. I think, you know, as Tracy mentioned in the beginning, you know, the three of us sort of found each other through, you know, this kind of circuit of and, you know, and this was maybe 3 years ago. And I think the more of us that are in this sort of relation of support and sort of a growing steam behind ensuring anti-racism inside of these organizations, you know, the better. And that requires us resource sharing and supporting each other as we go. And I will say, you know, one of the main themes that I heard coming out of our group was the need for real bravery inside of a large institution. Right? I mean, that you might have resources, but somebody's controlling them and it's not always you. And it's rarely you. And so, you know, how do you build a culture where there really can be a sense of like an army together that can actually move things? And, you know, White Caucuses was one of the tactics we talked about as just a way of starting that process of finding each other and of making conversations about white supremacy culture sort of integral to the workplace. But, you know, I'm sure there's many, many more tactics that all of us are going to be learning and need to be continuing to share with each other, because, you know, we can be each other's army even across, you know, multiple institutions. And I apologize for the militaristic metaphors. It's just where.
Okay, I think we're getting toward our closing. Tracy, I think you're gonna bring us home for this.
Yeah, and I just want to say as an aside, I have a friend who is committed to taking any sort of like violent expression and reworking it into something more peaceful. And so I will add that to the list. But the one that I always laugh whenever she says it is love two birds with one heart instead of like kill two birds with one stone.
We do hold two birds with one hand.
Thank you.
Hold two birds with one hand. That's what
there
we
you go.
Eat two birds with one scone.
Oh my gosh, I love that because they're big, the scones. Like two birds can probably feed off of one scone. Anyways, I'm glad we're ending on a cheerful note. So I just want to thank you all for showing up with your authentic selves to this session. I think we all recognize it's really hard work. It's hard to talk about this work. I don't know about you, but when I talk about my anti-racist practice, it is so incredibly humbling because I'm realizing all of the different ways that I'm messing up, and all of the all of the different ways that I'm messing up, and all of the, like, you know, even just sort of like outing the things that I'm not doing right. I'm like, oh gosh, everyone, have I just outed myself as being the worst supervisor, or have I framed an issue incorrectly? It's, you know, it's easy to feel like you're messing up in this work. And I think it's important to name the challenges and recognize that when we, you know, realize, I don't know how many, like what, at what points in your lives you were like, oh yeah, I need to do this. But, you know, when you start to go down this path, there are probably emotions that you didn't imagine you would have, or challenges you didn't imagine you would come up against. I think I said this to someone, like when we decided at NESOG that we were going to really authentically embody and center equity, there was a part of me that was like, we did it. How great, we're centering equity, we're doing it. And then that's when the actual work begins, like making the decision to do that. That's the easy part. Who doesn't want to do that? Except, like, you know, people who enjoy the name racist. But for most people who want to do the right thing, you want to dismantle racism, you want to, you know, do what you have to do. And then you realize that there's a lot of growing to be done. And so for me also, just managing, you know, when you open yourself up to this work, you're opening yourself up to really witnessing the pain and the hurt and the anger and the real violence and harm that BIPOC people have experienced because of racism. And I think facing that hurt is not easy, you know, like nobody wants to see people in pain, but when, for me, what's been a learning edge is to really manage my own reaction to that hurt and anger and pain. Because whether it's pointed at me or just generally towards a group of white people, or maybe I haven't even done anything, or I don't think I've done anything, and I'm still experiencing the pain as a direct accusation, it's hard to not respond defensively. It's hard to not respond with shame or self-blame. And I think it's so important that we hold space for and recognize that, you know, what, it's our job to hold that space and to really lean into the discomfort, as Kathy Davies said in our session, that we are experiencing when we're confronted with how racism has benefited us and harmed others. I was recently at a training for white managers to do less harm to their BIPOC staff, which I highly recommend. It's through, it's done by a woman named Yejin Lee. And if there's a resource list going out, I'll add it to that, where she basically spent 3 hours like expressing her anger and grief and emotions at us that were, you know, sometimes it was like, I didn't do that thing that she's saying, but that wasn't the point. The point is that, like, it's part of the growth to experience that. And when you're in conflict with someone, that's where you really learn how to grow. So that's all I'll say about that. If you're feeling kind of crappy about yourself, you're probably you're on the right path, but don't wallow in that feeling. Keep on climbing up that mountain. You'll never reach the top. That's okay. That's the work. It's not in the end, it's in the journey. With that super cheesy metaphor, I just want to thank you all for coming to this session. I'm super stoked that Natalie and Lauren wanted to do this again with me, and I hope this was helpful for you all. And please keep in touch and share your learnings and thoughts. And, you know, we're here to help each other along in this work.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Thank you, everyone.
What was the training? Where are you gonna put it? In the chat?
I don't know. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
I don't,
We're gonna have a resource, some kind of a resource thing. How does it get out to people? Through Whova?
I'll put it on Whova somewhere. Yes,
Wahova? No, I'm just kidding. It's Huba.
yes, usually that. I'll put it somewhere. I'll put it somewhere in Whova for you all to see it.
Yeah, same with the slides and some of the resources from the chat. I think that sounds great.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Dory.